Hello everyone, my name is Armin Hutzler. I've been working as a front-end developer at NETCONOMY for about 5 years. And today I'm going to show you how to visualize quality. So I've worked with end-to-end testing for about 4 months last year and want to share some best practices with you. And also I will show you the dashboard I built to visualize those test results. So let's start at the beginning. What is end-to-end testing? And how does it compare to other forms of testing? In the testing pyramid on the right, you see at the bottom the unit tests. Those are used for testing components in isolation. Building on that, integration tests test the interaction between different components. And end-to-end testing goes a step further and tests the whole application, including all external services. End-to-end tests simulate real user behavior. So they go through a web page and click through a web page like a real user would. And they are usually used to test big workflows. So for instance, I'm in the e-commerce context, and we are testing the checkout with end-to-end testing, meaning from adding a product to the shopping cart to actually finishing the order. And the end-to-end test ensures that all components in this workflow function as expected. Commonly used framework for end-to-end testing are Selenium, Cypress, or Playwright, for instance. And why is it important to have a stable end-to-end testing suite? It ensures a reliable code base. So if your end-to-end tests run through regularly and consistently, you can be sure that your code works as expected. It helps you to detect bugs early. So if your test suite runs once a day during the night, for instance, you will immediately see if something broke that you merged the day before. This way, developers can take more risks, so they can do a big refactoring and can be sure if the test pipeline runs through successfully, I didn't break anything, that they didn't break anything. And it also builds confidence in the release, so our quality managers use the end-to-end test suite for their regression tests, for instance. And in the end, it also saves costs, because it saves time for our quality managers. And since it helps detect bugs early, it makes them cheaper to fix them later in the development cycle. But there are also some, like to everything, there are also some drawbacks to end-to-end testing. They usually take a longer time to write than, for instance, unit tests. They are sometimes flaky. Flaky meaning that they fail on one day and then they succeed on the other and so on. And they are quite challenging to maintain, since if your application evolves over time, you have to constantly adapt the end-to-end tests to those changes. They also take a longer time to execute. So for instance, our unit testing suite takes around 5 minutes to run. The end-to-end tests take more than 20 minutes. And they are quite challenging to debug. Since so many wheels are in motion, so many services and components are involved, it's sometimes quite hard to figure out where the problem is. So now I told you all about the problems of end-to-end testing, but I also want to give you some best practices to counteract those problems. So let's say you set up your end-to-end test suite. The first thing you should do is integrate it in your CI/CD pipeline. This ensures that your tests run automatically in a special environment and run through consistently and help you detect bugs early. Then you should always use the latest version of your test suite and also your browsers to make use of the latest features and bug fixes and ensure that your application works with the latest browser versions, that it's still compatible. You should also keep your test data consistent. So for instance, we test with products and we make sure that the product data is consistent across test runs. You should use resilient selectors, meaning don't use like class or CSS class or ID selectors to select your elements for your test. Use dedicated attributes like data attributes. For instance, you can use a data test ID. And if a developer encounters such a test ID during development, They know, okay, if I change something here, I have to check if the Cypress tests or if the end-to-end tests still run through. Next, you should use auto-weighting instead of explicit weights. So all of the frameworks I mentioned before, like Cypress or Playwright, give you the chance to, if you, for instance, want to wait until a button is interactive, you can wait for 2 seconds and then click the button. But the test suite, if you do that with an explicit wait, would really wait for 2 seconds, even if the button is interactive earlier. If you make use of auto-weighting, you can tell a certain event, like a button click, to wait for 30 seconds until the button is interactive. If it's interactive earlier, it would click it right away, so you save a lot of time. Even better would be to synchronize your tests with network requests. Back to the example with the product. If you want to display the product details on a certain page and have to fetch the data from the backend, you can tell your test suite to wait until this request is finished until you continue execution. That helps, for instance, with requests that might be delayed. Then one important thing is to only test websites you control. So you shouldn't test external UI because you don't have control over changes. So if the change is selected that you use, then your test suite breaks. If the test suite has issues, it's also outside of your control. And they might even use tools like captchas to prevent you from using the site in an automated test at all. If you really need to test an external service, use its API. For instance, you might need this for a login. This makes the test faster and more reliable. Then, rerun failing tests. So sometimes really your application has a hiccup and the test just randomly fails. Then you can tell the test suite, okay, rerun it once. If it fails again, okay, we have a problem. It's really failing. If it succeeds the second time, it's counted as successful. This makes the test suite more consistent, but might hide possibly really actual flaky tests. And the last point that I learned during my time working with end-to-end testing is sometimes it's not the test suite that is the problem or that needs to be fixed, it's the actual application. For instance, we had an issue with a layout shift, and the end-to-end tests failed because of it. But the actual user might have the same problem. So they want to go to a web page, they want to click a button, something pops in on top, and they click somewhere completely different. That might sound familiar. So be sure if you have a problem with your test suite, be sure that it's not the application that's the problem. Okay, now let's say you set up your test suite, you're following all of those best practices, but there are still some pain points that we discovered. The first one is test visibility is limited. It's running somewhere in a pipeline. Your quality manager might even not know how to get there. And then we still need several clicks to get to the actual result. Download a zip folder, extract it, go find the XML, and then to discover where the problem is. Then also comparison between different pipeline runs is difficult. So if you want to discover, okay, see if a test is flaky, for instance, you would have to check the recent pipeline runs individually to check, okay, how often is it failing, how often is it succeeding. Same with finding out when a test started failing, because you would have to click through the pipelines back in time until you find the last successful test run. So when facing those problems, we sat down and thought about, okay, how can we visualize the test results better so they are easier to compare? The first thing we did, we added a Slack notification. So after a test run finished, the CI/CD pipeline posts this message that you can see on the right to our Slack channel. And that gives you a good overview. Okay, is my pipeline actually, are my tests running through successfully, or do I have to have a look at something? You have one-click access to the pipeline, so we added a link at the bottom, so it's easy to access. And most importantly, it's a daily reminder. Every day, it will show the message, okay, do you have a problem with your tests? Deal with them. The next thing we developed was a dashboard to visualize those test results over time. So I sat down with our tech team, and we came up with the following architecture. So from our CI pipeline, we push the test results, so the XMLs, to a Google Cloud storage bucket. That automatically triggers a Google Cloud function written in Go, which parses the XMLs and uploads everything to a BigQuery data warehouse. We chose a data warehouse compared to a database because it's just more performant with read operations. So it's perfect for analyzing big amount of data. And finally, we queried the data from the data warehouse and displayed it in a Grafana dashboard. So how did the dashboard end up looking? So we have 3 different dashboards. The first one is for the run overview, so you can compare different runs. For instance, here you can see those on top, visualization of the last 7 runs with the succeeded and failing tests. The second panel shows you the same information in a table, but you can also go to the pipeline through the link, and also can drill down to individual test runs. In the panel at the bottom, we see the run duration in case we want to make any adjustments or any improvements there. Drilling down to the individual test run, you can see how many tests actually ran through, how many of them were successful or failing, and you get a list of all the failing tests. And you can drill down once more to get to the actual test result details dashboard, where you can see for one test how often it failed in the last week, for instance. Here we can see this test, it mostly succeeds, but sometimes failed. So that's the definition of flaky that I mentioned earlier. So you can see this test, I should have a look, something's wrong there. And to debug that further, you can have a look at the table at the bottom to see the reason for the failure. So what does this all, the dashboard and the Slack notification, give us? What are the improvements? We have a daily reminder, as I already mentioned. Single-click access to the dashboard, which we also included in the Slack notification. There we have a visual representation, which makes it easy for us to compare different test runs. So we can exactly see when a test started failing. As you saw earlier, we can detect flaky tests really easily, and can then immediately do something about it. But still, there are some remaining challenges. Now you have the dashboard, your test pipeline set up, but the dashboard is not a magic bullet. So someone also needs to have a look at the dashboard. It just doesn't fix your problem by itself. So what I would recommend is to have a dedicated driver in your team who has, best would be a daily look at the dashboard, and then informs the team instead if something is failing. But maintaining the end-to-end pipeline is a team effort. So everyone should know which tests exist, so they can adapt it if they implement a new feature. And I would also recommend to include your end-to-end test suite in one of your processes. So for instance, if you are making it a habit to test the feature your colleague implemented, part of the process should be to check the end-to-end pipeline. Okay, now we come already to the end of the presentation. So I showed you some best practices of end-to-end testing and how we visualized the results in the dashboard. And what that gives us is a lot of confidence in our code. So if we change something, we can refactor our code, do big refactorings. And then in the end, if our quality manager doesn't cry out in the morning and the pipeline runs through successfully, we can be sure, okay, we didn't break anything important, at least. So thanks for your attention. That was my talk, and have a good day. Goodbye.